You're not family. You're the help." Jessica said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather, like those words weren't about to split my life clean in half. And for a moment, I just stood there at the edge of the dining room table, my fingers still resting on the back of the chair I had pulled out for her, the same chair I had polished just that morning, the same table I had set with my best china, the same home I had helped pay for dollar by dollar over 32 years, and I smiled. Not because it was funny, not because it didn't hurt, but because something inside me had gone very still, the kind of stillness that comes right before everything changes. Daniel didn't say a word, not when she said it, not when I looked at him, not even when our eyes met for half a second before he glanced down at his plate like it suddenly required all of his attention. My son, the boy I had once held through sleepless nights, now sitting there in silence as his wife reduced me to hired help in my own home. I nodded, slowly, as if I were agreeing with her, as if her version of reality had somehow become the truth, and I said, "You're right." My voice calm, steady, almost gentle. Jessica blinked, clearly not expecting that. She was waiting for a reaction, maybe tears, maybe an argument, something she could twist and use, but I gave her nothing. I turned, walked out of the dining room, and climbed the stairs one step at a time, my hand brushing against the wall where family photos used to hang before she decided they made the house feel dated. My bedroom door was exactly where it had always been, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Not really, not after months of small changes, small erasures, small decisions made without me. I opened the closet and pulled out my old suitcase, the one I hadn't used since my husband passed, the zipper still stiff from disuse. I set it on the bed and stared at it for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of dishes clinking downstairs, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been told I didn't belong. And I began to pack, slowly, deliberately, folding each piece of clothing with care, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward, one item at a time. The night outside my window was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice things you've ignored for years, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, the absence of a voice that used to fill this house with warmth. I paused for a second, my hand resting on the edge of the suitcase, and a thought crossed my mind. Simple, almost absurd. If I wasn't family, then what exactly had I been all these years? And more importantly, what had they taken from me without me even realizing it? I closed the suitcase halfway, not locking it yet, not just yet, because something about the way Jessica had said those words, something about the way Daniel had stayed silent, didn't feel like the beginning of the end. It felt like the moment I finally started paying attention, and for the first time in a very long time. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what was still mine. I did not sleep that night. Not really. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed, staring at the ceiling as the hours passed, listening to every sound the house made as if it were speaking to me in a language I was only now beginning to understand. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like the walls themselves had shifted just enough to remind me that I no longer belonged inside them. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, careful, followed by the low murmur of voices. Jessica's voice first, sharp even when she whispered, then Daniel's, quieter, uncertain. I could not make out every word, but I heard enough. "She will leave," Jessica said. "She has nowhere else to go." And Daniel did not argue. He did not defend me. He only sighed in that tired way he used to when he was a teenager being told to clean his room, as if my life, my presence, my entire existence had become an inconvenience he no longer wanted to deal with. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to steady myself, because something inside me was beginning to line up, small moments, scattered memories, things I had brushed aside before, now falling into place with quiet precision, the way Jessica had started making decisions about the house without asking me. The way my mail had been moved from the front table to a drawer in the kitchen. The way Daniel had stopped calling it our home and started saying the house, like it was already something separate from me. I sat up slowly, the suitcase still open at the foot of the bed, half packed, half waiting, and I realized that what happened at dinner was not sudden. It was not an outburst. It was the final step in something that had been unfolding for months, maybe longer. I stood and walked to the dresser, opening the top drawer where I kept the important things, documents, letters, old receipts. The kinds of papers people only think about when something goes wrong. My fingers moved through them carefully, pulling out a folder I had not opened in years, the edges worn, the label faded but still readable. I carried it to the bed and sat down, opening it slowly. Inside were copies of payments, bank transfers, records of contributions that stretched back decades, the down payment on the house, the renovations, the property taxes during the years when Daniel was still building his career, every number, every signature, every proof that this place was never just theirs, never just something I had been allowed to stay in. I ran my hand over the papers, feeling the weight of them, not just as documents, but as evidence of a life built piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice, and for the first time since Jessica spoke those words, I felt something other than shock. It was not anger, not yet. It was clarity, sharp and cold, like stepping outside on a winter morning and finally seeing the world exactly as it is. I looked back at the suitcase, still open, still waiting for a decision that suddenly did not feel as simple as leaving, because leaving meant walking away quietly, and something about that no longer sat right with me. Not after everything I had just remembered, not after everything they had assumed I would forget. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 3:30 in the morning, too early for most people, but not for the one person I knew would understand exactly what I needed. I hesitated for only a second before opening my contacts, my finger hovering over a name I had not called in years. And then I pressed it, lifting the phone to my ear as it began to ring, my voice steady when I finally spoke. Howard, I hope I did not wake you, but I think it is time we reviewed my husband's paperwork. Howard did not sound surprised to hear my voice, which in itself told me more than any explanation could have. His tone was calm, measured, like a man who had been expecting this call for a very long time. Margaret, he said, not asking if everything was all right, not offering polite concern, just acknowledging me in a way that felt steady, grounding. I was wondering when you would reach out. I sat on the edge of the bed, the folder still open beside me, my fingers resting on the papers that suddenly felt more important than anything else in that house. I think I need to understand what was left to me, I said, choosing my words carefully, because something told me that this conversation was not just about information. It was about confirmation, about finally seeing the full shape of something that had been hidden in plain sight. There was a pause on the other end, not hesitation, but consideration. Have you reviewed the documents Daniel provided after your husband passed? He asked, and I felt a quiet shift in my chest, something tightening just slightly. He handled most of it. I replied, the words sounding different now than they had when I first said them years ago. Back then they had been spoken with trust, with relief even. Now they carried a different weight, one that made me sit a little straighter. I thought everything was straightforward. Howard exhaled softly, not in frustration, but in the way someone does when they are about to explain something that should have been explained a long time ago. It was not as simple as it appeared, he said, and I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting that sentence settle, because it confirmed what I had already begun to suspect, that the story I had been living in was not the whole story. Your husband made several provisions, Howard continued, including protections that were meant specifically for you. I opened my eyes again, looking down at the folder in front of me, at the years of quiet contribution, documented in ink and signatures. Protections, I repeated, my voice steady, but quieter now, more focused. Yes, he said, conditions tied to the distribution of certain assets, conditions that required a level of respect and care toward you as the surviving spouse. The room felt very still again, but this time it was different from before. This was not the stillness of shock. This was the stillness of something aligning, something becoming clear in a way that could not be undone. And if those conditions were not met, I asked, already knowing that the answer would matter more than anything else he could say. Howard did not rush his response. Then the distribution changes, he said simply. And that was all. No dramatic explanation, no raised voice, just a quiet statement of fact that carried more weight than anything Jessica had said the night before. I let out a slow breath, not realizing I had been holding it, and looked around the room again, at the furniture, the walls. The small details that had once felt like proof of belonging, now revealed as something else entirely, something temporary, something conditional. I would like to review everything, I said, my voice firm now. Not loud, not emotional, just certain. In person, Howard replied immediately, as if he had been expecting that request as well. I can meet you this afternoon, 10 o'clock, my office. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. Now approaching 4 in the morning, the house still quiet. Still unaware of what had just begun to shift. I will be there, I said, and after we ended the call, I sat there for a moment longer, the phone still in my hand, the suitcase still open, but no longer waiting, because the decision I thought I had made earlier that night had changed, not in a dramatic way, not with sudden emotion, but with something far more powerful, understanding. I reached forward and closed the folder carefully, placing it beside the suitcase instead of inside it, because I was not leaving with just clothes. Not anymore. I was leaving with something they had not expected me to take. The truth morning came quietly, without announcement, the kind of pale light that slips through the curtains as if it does not want to disturb anything. And for a moment, I lay still, listening again, half expecting to hear the same voices from the night before. But the house was silent now, heavy with that familiar illusion of peace that only exists when nothing has been said out loud yet. I sat up slowly, my body tired but my mind sharper than it had been in months, maybe years, and I looked at the suitcase, still open but no longer uncertain, then at the folder beside it, and I understood something simple, something that should have been obvious all along. This was never about whether I stayed or left. It was about how I chose to leave. I stood and walked to the closet, selecting a simple outfit, nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention, just something clean, composed, intentional, because today was not about them. It was about clarity. I dressed without rushing, smoothing the fabric of my blouse the way I always had before important days, the habit still there even after everything else had changed. Downstairs, I could hear movement now, cabinets opening, the low hum of the coffee machine. Jessica was always up early, always efficient, always in control of the small details that made her feel like she owned the space. I paused at the top of the stairs, my hand resting lightly on the railing, and watched for a moment as she moved through the kitchen, her back to me, her posture confident. Unaware, Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, his expression neutral, detached, like the conversation from the night before had already been filed away and forgotten. I stepped down quietly, each step measured, not hiding, just not announcing myself. Neither of them looked up until I reached the bottom, and when they did, there was a flicker of something in Jessica's eyes, not concern, not guilt, just calculation. You are up early, she said, her tone light, almost pleasant, as if nothing had happened, as if she had not drawn a line the night before and placed me firmly on the other side of it. I nodded, moving past her toward the counter, pouring myself a cup of coffee with steady hands. I have an appointment, I said simply, not offering details, not explaining. Daniel glanced up briefly, then back down at his phone. Everything okay? He asked, the question sounding automatic, empty, like something he felt obligated to say rather than something he truly wanted answered. I met his eyes for just a second, long enough to see the distance there, the absence of curiosity, the quiet acceptance of a situation he had chosen not to question. Yes, I replied, and it was the truth, not because everything was fine, but because for the first time, everything made sense. I set the cup down without drinking from it, the warmth no longer necessary, and turned toward the hallway. Jessica watched me closely now, her attention sharpening as if she sensed something shifting, something she had not planned for, but she said nothing, and neither did I. I walked back upstairs, picked up the folder, then closed the suitcase fully, this time pulling the zipper all the way around until it met at the corner with a soft, final sound. I did not lock it, not yet, because this was not the end of anything, not really. It was the beginning of something I had been too trusting to see before. I carried both the suitcase and the folder down the stairs, the weight balanced, manageable, familiar in a way that felt almost comforting. And when I reached the door, I did not hesitate. I did not look back. I simply opened it and stepped outside into the cool morning air, closing it gently behind me, leaving them inside with their version of the story. And taking mine with me, I drove in silence, the road stretching out in front of me in long, familiar lines that somehow felt different now, like I was seeing everything through a lens that had finally been cleaned. The early morning traffic was light, Just a few cars moving steadily toward their own routines, their own lives. And for a moment, I wondered how many of them believed they were exactly where they belonged. How many of them would one day realize they had been standing on ground that was never truly theirs. I kept both hands on the wheel, steady, controlled, the suitcase resting in the back seat. The folder beside me on the passenger side where I could see it, a quiet reminder that this was not just another errand, not just another appointment. When I pulled into the parking lot of Howard's office, the building looked exactly as it always had, clean, professional, unchanged by the kind of personal upheaval that had shifted everything inside me overnight. I parked carefully, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, not out of hesitation, but to acknowledge the weight of what I was about to confirm. Then I stepped out, smoothing my jacket as I walked toward the entrance, the glass doors reflecting a version of me that looked composed, deliberate, someone who had already made her decision. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile and directed me down the hallway. And when I entered Howard's office, he stood to meet me, his expression calm, respectful. But there was something else there too, something like recognition, as if he understood that I was not the same woman who had signed those papers years ago without question. "Margaret," he said, gesturing for me to sit. And I did. Placing the folder on the desk between us, he opened a file of his own, thicker, more organized. The kind of file that does not exist unless someone has been paying close attention for a long time. "I brought copies," he said, sliding a stack of documents toward me. And I began to read, slowly at first, then with growing focus. The language was formal, precise, but the meaning underneath it was unmistakable. Provisions, conditions, safeguards, all written in careful detail, all designed with one clear purpose: to protect me, to ensure that I would not be pushed aside, not ignored, not reduced to something less than what I was. My eyes moved from line to line, each sentence confirming what I had begun to suspect, that what had been presented to me after my husband passed was only part of the story. "Daniel signed as executor," Howard said quietly, not interrupting, just adding context, and I nodded, remembering how easily I had accepted that, how natural it had seemed to trust my own son. But there were specific clauses he was obligated to uphold. Howard continued, tapping a section of the document. I followed his finger, reading the words carefully, and there it was, clear, direct, undeniable, language that tied inheritance to conduct, to treatment, to the way I was regarded within the family. I leaned back slightly, letting the information settle, not rushing to react, not allowing emotion to cloud what was now a very simple equation. If those conditions had been broken, then everything changed. "Have they been followed?" Howard asked, his voice neutral, but the question itself carried weight. I thought about the dinner, the words spoken without hesitation, the silence that followed, the months of quiet dismissal that had led up to that moment, and I shook my head once, slowly. "No," I said, and for the first time since this began, the answer felt clear, not complicated, not emotional, just true. Howard closed the file in front of him, his movements deliberate. "Then we proceed accordingly," he said, and there was no drama in his tone, no sense of escalation, just a simple statement that something was about to be corrected. I looked down at the documents one more time, then back up at him. And in that moment, I understood that I had not walked into that office as someone seeking answers. I had walked in as someone ready to act, and when I reached for the pen he placed beside the papers, my hand did not tremble, not even slightly. I signed my name slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it, every letter, deliberate, every stroke final. The ink settling into the paper like a quiet declaration that something long ignored was now being corrected. Howard watched without interruption, giving me the space to finish, and when I placed the pen down, there was no dramatic shift in the room, no sudden change in the air, just a calm understanding that a line had been crossed. "We will file this immediately," he said, gathering the documents into a neat stack, his movements efficient, practiced. "They will be notified." I nodded once, not asking when, not asking how, because those details no longer mattered as much as the outcome. I stood, adjusting my jacket again out of habit, and for a brief moment, I felt something unfamiliar, not relief, not satisfaction, but a quiet steadiness, The kind that comes from finally standing on something solid after realizing how long you have been balancing on uncertainty. Thank you, Howard, I said, and he gave a small nod in return, not overstepping, not offering reassurance I did not need, just acknowledging the shift that had taken place. When I stepped back outside, the sun had fully risen, casting a clear, even light across the parking lot, the world moving forward as it always does, unaware of the small but significant decisions that change the course of someone's life. I walked to my car, placed the now lighter folder on the passenger seat, and paused for a second before getting in, not out of hesitation, but to consider what came next, because for the first time, the next step was not being decided for me. I was choosing it. I started the engine, but instead of driving away immediately, I reached for my phone, my fingers steady as I scrolled to Daniel's name. I did not rush. I did not overthink. I simply pressed call and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before he answered, his voice distracted, like I had interrupted something more important. "Mom," he said, and there was that familiar distance again, that subtle separation that had grown over time without either of us naming it. "I will be back at the house this afternoon," I said, my tone calm, measured, giving nothing away. There was a brief pause, then a slight shift in his voice, a hint of curiosity, maybe even caution. "Is everything okay?" he asked again, the same question as before, but this time it sounded less automatic, more aware. I looked out through the windshield, watching a car pass slowly in front of me, and allowed myself a small, almost invisible smile. "Yes," I replied, and again, it was the truth, because everything was finally exactly as it needed to be. "Good," he said, though there was something uncertain in the word now, something that told me he could feel it too, even if he did not understand it yet. "We will be here," he added, and I ended the call without anything further, no explanation, no warning, just a simple confirmation that the next time I walked through that door, it would not be as someone waiting to be accepted. I placed the phone back on the seat, tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and this time, when I pulled out of the parking lot, there was no question in my mind about where I was going, only a quiet certainty that when I arrived, I would not be stepping back into the same role they had assigned me. I would be stepping into the truth they had chosen to ignore. I pulled into the driveway just after noon, the sun sitting high and bright above the house that had once felt like the center of everything. And for a moment I remained in the car, engine off, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, looking at the front door as if it belonged to someone else, as if I were about to visit rather than return. The windows reflected the sky, calm and undisturbed, giving no sign of what waited inside, and I stepped out, closing the car door with a soft, controlled motion, the suitcase still in the back seat, the folder now resting quietly beside it, no longer needing to be carried like proof, because the proof had already been set in motion. I walked up the path at an even pace, not rushing, not hesitating, and when I reached the door, I did not knock. I used my key, the same key I had carried for decades, the same key that had unlocked this house through years of family dinners, holidays, quiet mornings, and long nights. It turned easily, as if nothing had changed, and I stepped inside. The air felt familiar, but thinner somehow, like a place that had been emptied of something essential. Voices came from the kitchen, Jessica speaking first, her tone sharp but controlled, followed by Daniel's quieter responses, and when I entered, they both turned toward me, their expressions shifting in small, telling ways. Daniel stood up halfway, uncertain, while Jessica remained seated, her posture composed, her eyes already assessing, already calculating. "You are back," she said, not as a question, not as a welcome, just an observation. I nodded once, setting my keys down on the counter with a soft, deliberate sound. "I said I would be," I replied, my voice even, giving nothing away. Daniel stepped forward slightly, his brow furrowed now, something uneasy beginning to surface. "Mom, what is going on?" he asked, and this time the question was not empty. This time it carried a weight he could not quite define. I looked at him for a moment, really looked, at the lines in his face that had deepened over the years, at the distance that had grown between us, at the choices he had made by saying nothing when it mattered most, and I answered simply, "We need to talk." Jessica leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms slowly, her expression tightening just enough to reveal that she understood something was different, something she had not anticipated. About what? She asked, her tone still controlled, but no longer casual. I moved past them, taking a seat at the table I had once set so carefully, the same table where everything had shifted the night before, and I folded my hands in front of me. Calm, steady, unhurried. About the house, I said, and the words settled into the room like something solid, something that could not be ignored or dismissed. Daniel's posture changed immediately, a tension moving through him, while Jessica's gaze sharpened. Focused now, alert. What about it? She asked, her voice quieter, more measured, and I met her eyes, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a clarity that had not been there before. About who it belongs to, I said, and for the first time since I walked back through that door, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to make it clear that whatever they had expected from me, this was not it. I let the silence sit between us, not filling it, not softening it, because, for the first time, I understood the power of letting others feel the weight of their own assumptions. Daniel shifted slightly, his hand moving to the back of the chair as if he needed something to hold on to, while Jessica remained still, her eyes fixed on me, searching for a crack, a hesitation, something she could use, but I gave her none. I reached into my bag and placed a single document on the table, sliding it forward just enough for them to see, not pushing it toward them, not forcing it, just placing it there like a fact that existed whether they chose to acknowledge it or not. This is a copy, I said calmly. The original has already been filed. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes scanning the page quickly, confusion forming almost immediately. I do not understand, he said, but his voice lacked certainty now, as if he already knew that understanding was coming whether he wanted it or not. Jessica leaned forward next, her posture tighter, more controlled, her gaze moving across the lines with far more attention, and I watched the exact moment her expression changed, not dramatically, not in a way anyone unfamiliar would notice, but I saw it, the slight tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible pause in her breathing, the instant recognition that something had shifted. Beyond her control. There are conditions, I continued, my tone even, almost conversational, conditions that were always there. Daniel looked up at me, his brow furrowed deeper now. What conditions? He asked, and this time there was something else in his voice, not just confusion, but a quiet edge of concern. I met his gaze without looking away. The kind that require respect, I said, letting the word settle, not emphasizing it, not raising my voice, just stating it plainly. Jessica straightened slowly, her composure returning piece by piece, but it was different now, more careful, more measured. I think there must be some misunderstanding, she said, her tone smooth, practiced, the same tone she used when explaining things away, when reshaping situations to her advantage. I shook my head once, a small, definitive motion. No, I replied. There is no misunderstanding. Daniel looked back down at the document, reading more carefully now, his eyes moving slower, absorbing the language he had never taken the time to question before, and I could see it happening, the realization forming not all at once, but in fragments, each line adding another piece, another shift, another quiet undoing of what he thought he knew. This says, he began, then stopped, his voice catching slightly, not from emotion, but from the weight of what he was reading. Jessica reached for the paper then, her fingers firm, pulling it closer, scanning faster this time, as if speed might change the meaning, but it did not, it could not. I sat back slightly, my hands resting calmly in my lap. No tension, no urgency, just patience, because I no longer needed to convince them of anything. The truth was already there, written in a language they could not argue with, and after a long moment, Jessica looked up at me again, her eyes no longer calculating in the same way. Now there was something else beneath the surface, something tighter, something that recognized the limits of control. What exactly are you saying? She asked, her voice quieter now, more careful than before, and I held her gaze steadily. My answer simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. I am saying that if I am not family, I said, then you are not entitled to anything that was meant for family. And this time, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of understanding. Daniel did not speak right away. He just stood there, the paper still in his hands, reading the same lines again as if repetition might soften what they meant. But it did not, and I watched him carefully, not with anger, not even with disappointment anymore, just with a quiet recognition that this moment had been coming for a long time. Jessica was the first to move, setting the document down slowly, too carefully, as if controlling the motion might help her regain control of the situation. "This is not how things work," she said, her voice calm but strained beneath the surface. The confidence she carried earlier now measured, deliberate. I tilted my head slightly, not challenging her, just acknowledging the statement. "It is exactly how it works," I replied, my tone even, because there was no longer any need to argue. The structure had already been set, the decision already made. Daniel finally looked up at me, really looked this time, and there was something in his expression that had not been there before. Not just confusion, not just concern, but realization, slow and uncomfortable. "Mom," he said quietly, and that word, simple as it was, felt different now, heavier, as if he was only just beginning to understand what it meant. I held his gaze for a moment, then let it go, because I was not there for apologies, not anymore. Jessica straightened in her chair, her posture returning to something closer to what it had been before, but the difference was clear. She was no longer leading the conversation, she was reacting to it. "We can talk about this," she said, her voice softer now, almost conciliatory, as if the right tone might still shift the outcome. I shook my head once, a small, controlled motion. "There is nothing to discuss," I said, and the finality in my voice settled over the room in a way that words rarely do. I stood up slowly, smoothing my jacket again out of habit. The same small gesture I had made that morning, but now it carried a different meaning. Not preparation, but closure. Daniel took a step toward me, hesitation clear in the movement. "Where are you going?" he asked, and for the first time, there was something close to urgency in his voice. I looked at him, not with coldness, not with warmth, just with clarity. "Forward," I said. And the simplicity of the answer seemed to stop him more than anything else could have. Jessica said nothing this time, her silence no longer controlled, but contained, as if she understood that anything she said now would only confirm what had already been established. I walked toward the door, my steps steady, unhurried, the same way they had been when I left that morning. But this time, I was not carrying uncertainty with me. I reached for the handle, pausing for just a fraction of a second, not to reconsider, but to acknowledge the space behind me, the years, the memories, the version of myself that had stayed too long out of loyalty to something that no longer existed. Then I opened the door and stepped outside, the air just as clear as it had been earlier, the world unchanged in all the ways that matter, and yet completely different in the only way that counted. I walked to my car, opened the door, and before getting in, I allowed myself one final thought, not of loss, not of regret, but of understanding. I had never been the help. I had been the foundation. And once that foundation was removed, everything else would have to stand on its own. I got into the car, closed the door gently, and drove away without looking back.